Thank you for viewing this YouTube archive of a Conscious Consumer Network broadcast. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Check out our weekly broadcast guide for weekly updates on scheduled broadcasts. Help keep us on the air by contributing to our network support fund. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or get in touch via email. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Good evening, dear audience, ladies and gentlemen. This is Desiree Rover from the Netherlands with the Minority of One report on April 3rd, 2016. And I have a very special guest for you. She is Dr. Betty Martini, and she has been the founder of the worldwide volunteer force Mission Possible World Health International. See how I'm pre-programmed? She has been committed to removing aspartame from our food supply and our medicine, by the way, which is a very good thought, of course. She's an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree for the work that she has done. And she has 22 years of experience in the medical field. And she has established a model for the nation by creating Physicians on Call, a network of 5 emergency care clinics in Atlanta, Georgia, staffed with medical doctors, 7 days, 24 hours. Services were without cost to the indigent. She speaks frequently on nationwide radio hookups for talk programs throughout the country and the world. Yes, indeed, to the Netherlands, over the big water. And the medical text, Aspartame Disease, an Ignored Epidemic by H.D. Roberts, a medical doctor, is dedicated to her. And I have that book. It's a Bible. It's this thick. Anyway, I leave it at that. She has a website. It's called www.mpwhi.com. And without further ado, I want to welcome you. Welcome.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you for having me.
Well, you have a very important message because aspartame, it's almost in everything, in children's medicine, in children's sweets, in our food supply, in our medicine. It's everywhere.
Indeed it is.
Yeah, and it has a very sordid history in the way it got weaseled into our food supply and our medicines and that sort of stuff. But I'm, first of all, very curious is what brought your attention to the subject of aspartame? What did happen?
Actually, I was retired, and my husband, who's a minister, we're Jehovah's Witnesses, had just sold his business because ministers are not paid, and he was going to use the funds to show me the world. And about that time, we had a friend visiting who was a doctor, and my husband's friend appeared to be dying. He'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and if you got close to him, his arms would go out in all directions, or it almost kick you, or you couldn't pronounce words. And my husband says, would you please find out what's killing Dick? You don't get Parkinson's one day and die the next. And this physician said, find out if he's using NutraSweet. So I asked to be referred to the world expert, which was Dr. H.J. Roberts. And he said, well, he's probably drinking a Diet Coke with the L-Dopa, and it's interacting. I said, but aspartame is supposed to be an additive, not a drug. He says, well, it's a neurotoxic drug. So I asked Dick, was he using it? And he said, yes. And I said, well, get off of it. And 4 days later, all the reactions disappeared. So I decided to read Dr. Roberts' first book. And when I did, I realized it caused seizures and MS and just about every disease you could imagine. So I started getting people off of it. The MS victims would walk out of their wheelchairs. People with seizures would stop having seizures. People with joint pain would get up and walk away. And even people that were blind could see again. So I called Dr. Roberts back and I said, Dr. Roberts, is this a world global epidemic? He said, yes, it is. So my husband decided that, well, instead of seeing the world, he says, we either can see it or save it. And he gave me his retirement funds to set up a global network all over the world to warn people about it. And in the end, I got to see the world anyway, because I lectured in different countries, in the UK and New Zealand, in the medical schools there, and around the world. And I didn't think that 25 years later I'd still be here, or that I would have this much trouble in getting it off the market. But in order to know how serious it is and how deadly it is an addictive, excitoneurotoxic, carcinogenic, genetically engineered drug, teratogen, and adjuvant, like in vaccines. And it damages the mitochondria, or the powerhouse of the cell. So it interacts with your drugs and vaccines. And with that said, you can't imagine the different things that it would cause, and people were just dropping dead. And so I had Dr. Blaylock write us an athlete alert, so that people would know why, the athletes were dropping dead. He sent me a pilot who had crashed his plane on aspartame. He said, dumb I'm not, but he said I couldn't make a decision. And so I went back to find out how such a horrible, deadly chemical poison ever got on the market. And the story almost sounds like something from the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
But G.D. Searle made this poison and tried to get it approved. And then the FDA realized that it was a poison and tried to prevent its approval. And finally, when they looked at the studies, and they were just terrible. They were taking the rats would develop aspartame breaks down to diketopiperazine, the brain tumor agent. And as the rats developed brain tumors, they would excise the tumors, put them back in the study. And when they died, they'd resurrect them on paper. So the FDA decided, well, they would indict them for fraud. Well, both U.S. prosecutors hired on with the defense team, and the statute of limitations expired. So the FDA set up a board of inquiry, and there was a task force, and the task force said that that all these studies were fraudulent, and that you could not even consider anything that G.D. Searle said. It was so damning that G.D. Searle sued to get that off the record. But thanks to the wonderful internet, we have the task force that they simply couldn't get rid of it. The Board of Inquiry decided to revoke the petition for approval so that it would never get on the market. And so G.D. Searle hired the famous Don Rumsfeld. And he said, I'll call in my markers and get it approved anyway. Well, what were those markers? According to a story, Reagan, he was on Reagan's transition team, and Reagan was supposed to make him vice president, couldn't find his telephone number, and made George Bush vice president. So he owed him a favor. And the day after he took office, he had someone from the transition team call and fire the FDA commissioner, Dr. Goyen. And the reason I know that so well is I spoke to his wife. She was there at the time he got the call, which was 3:00 in the morning. And then he knew it would take 30 days to get someone to the FDA. So what Reagan did is that he wrote an executive paper that made the FDA powerless to do anything about aspartame until he could get someone there to overrule the Board of Inquiry. And that's what he did. And Hull Hayes, Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes, was the one that did that and put aspartame on the market. Now, to begin with, they did that with dry foods because the FDA knew that at 86 degrees, it breaks down into methanol and then into formaldehyde and involves the body. And so it was all known from the beginning. And yet when you think about something like Equal, I think a 5-year-old child would know if you put that in hot coffee, you just heated it.
Yeah.
And so it was put on the market, and then without any meeting or anything else, they put it in carbonated beverages. Now, keep in mind that the National Soft Drink Association had already seen those horrible studies and had protested. We have it on the website, and we have it in the congressional record. Their 33-page report on how deadly it was. And yet they turned around and they lobbied for NutraSweet. And as soon as it got on the market, people were getting MS. They were going blind. Planes were crashing. There was just constant that they said what it was doing to the fetus. It was interacting with drugs. So Senator Metzenbaum wrote a bill to have independent studies done on the things that they saw in the population, like seizures and behavioral problems, and so they it never got out of committee because people like Orrin Hatch was paid by Monsanto, who bought GD Searle in 1985, and so that's how it started. There were more than one congressional hearing, and the FDA themselves actually testified against the FDA. And Dr. Adrian Gross, on August the 1st, 1985, he said, look, aspartame violates the Delaney Amendment because it breaks down to a brain tumor agent and it caused cancer in original studies, and therefore you cannot set an allowable daily dose of this chemical poison. And his last words will always be remembered. And if the FDA violates its own laws, who's left to protect the public? And so even though he testified, nothing ever got done. And the reason is that Big Pharma and Big Chem, they have such power over the FDA. As someone told me from Monsanto, we tell them to jump, the FDA says, hi.
Yeah.
So this is what went on from the beginning, and we set up operations in 43 countries, and the cases just came in, and they were just horrible. But one day, the last of the honest people from the FDA retired, and that was Dr. Jerome Bressler. So I called him. Now, you have to keep in mind, I didn't know him. I said, I know you wrote the Bressler report, and that you're one of the last honest people from the FDA that tried to prevent it from getting on the market. And I just want to thank you. And without knowing me, he said, Betty, he says, didn't you realize something was missing? And I said, well, yes, I did. Couldn't figure out what it was. He said that 20% of the studies, he said, that were the worst, the FDA sealed, and that the public is using this poison without knowing anything about it, and you've got to find it. So I was concerned at the time I'd be the only one knowing. So I called Dr. Russell Blaylock and Dr. H.J. Roberts, who called Jerome Bressler. And Dr. Roberts wrote his congressman and said, I want those studies. And the FDA wrote back and said, we have them, but we will not release them, that we consider them confidential. Well, what could be so confidential that they didn't want the public to know? Is those studies show neural tube defects and autism and spina bifida and cleft palate and all these horrible birth defects. And that's why we have autism all over the world, why it spread. I mean, when I was a young girl in school, who ever heard of autism? I mean,
yeah.
So in fact, I did the first movie, Sweet Misery, A Poison World, and then one called Sweet Remedy, where they interviewed the ADD people. And they said before aspartame was put on the market, we hardly ever used the terms ADD or ADHD. It all came from aspartame and has destroyed the brains of our children the world over. So I have spent all this time for years and years alerting the people and trying to get them off of it. And Dr. Caldwell provided a detox. Dr. Blaylock wrote what to do if you've used aspartame. And the doctors have have helped me and written reports so that now they could take them to their physician, on medical stationery, and the doctors would know what was wrong with them. And as an example, think of the epidemic of, let's say, diabetes. Well, aspartame precipitates diabetes, and it simulates and aggravates diabetic retinopathy and neuropathy. It destroys the optic nerve. It causes diabetics to go into convulsion. It interacts with insulin, and the methanol causes them to lose limbs. So if you want to kill a diabetic, use aspartame. So what do? They push aspartame on diabetics. But you need to know there are so many names. You've got aspartame, NutraSweet, Equal, Benevia, Canderel, Spoonful, and many times it's used unlabeled. And they petitioned the FDA a couple of years ago to allow it in dairy products without labeling. It's an all gum.
Oh, yeah.
And all the kids are using it, and it's just destroying them. These young girls, it builds up in their system. It's also an endocrine disrupting drug, so it stimulates prolactin, it changes the menses and causes infertility. Well, then if they get off of it and get pregnant and get back on it, it's a teratogen, and so it'll cause birth defects. And Dr. Sifredi in Italy did the studies on cancer and showed it to be a multi-potential carcinogen causing leukemia, lymphoma, lung cancer, liver cancer, just about every cancer there is. And just to show you why it's so hard to get it off the market, one day, Return to Eden, that's an organic market, called me and says, let us help you. And I said, sure, what do you want? She says, give us 16 of your worst reports. So I gave her one that showed that it was listed with the Pentagon in an inventory of prospective biochemical warfare weapons submitted to Congress. And one's on how it causes seizures, people who had died from it, diabetics. And they called the brochure Killer Color, and they gave it out free to about 2,000 people a day. Well, lo and behold, about 60 days later, they called me. They says, you will not believe what's going on down here. You think you're in the resurrection. I said, you don't have to tell me. I said, my address is not even in the booklet. I opened the door this morning and a woman fell in my arms and said I was blind, and now I can see. Because if it's vision is in the wet stage, the methanol converts to formaldehyde and formic acid and destroys the optic nerve, and they go into blindness. But if it's in the wet stage, then they can have their eyesight returned. And she says people are walking out of wheelchairs. MS victims are okay. People that have been going to doctors for years and the doctors didn't know what was wrong with them just woke up well about 60 days later. And that's why we say take the 60-day no aspartame test, because everybody that had gotten it and they were coming in and getting them by the handfuls was passing them out. Doctors were giving them to their patients, and they were all getting well, which means it's caused this horrible epidemic of diseases throughout the world. And there are many books on them, and the most recent, which is incredible, is the one that's While Science Sleeps, A Sweetener Kills. And that's by Dr. Monty. And the last chapter on aspartame and autism is on his website. You can read it free. It's whilesciencesleeps.com. And on that, in that chapter, you can see where they even blew up his house with him in it because he told the world that aspartame was a chemical poison. And you have to consider that with the millions of our activists throughout the world, that that the way this happened is that there were just so many people who got well from it and had suffered so much they wanted to help others, and they started other Mission Possible operations. And we do incidentally have a Mission Possible Holland, I meant to tell you.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes, his name is Ed, and it's GUN, something like that. I guess I'll have to email it to you. It's kind of a long name. But Ed's helping us in Holland, I guess, for 20 years now, getting the word out. I think it was because of him that Dr. Hans Bronkoff came to Atlanta and did a documentary some years ago.
Yeah. I have been trying to find this Hans Bronkhorst, but I will keep digging. It sounds to me like people higher up in the food chain know exactly what this aspartame is doing.
They do.
And what I hear is a genocidal agenda.
It is absolutely, yeah. It's in fact, it's called Agenda 21, and to depopulate the world. And as it happens, I live in Duluth, Georgia, which is about 25 miles from Atlanta, and it's about 2 hours from Elberton.
The Guidestones.
That's right. The Guidestones telling that they want to limit the population to 500 million.
Yep.
So that means they have to destroy 93% of the population.
Yep.
And that's what they're doing with aspartame. And you have to understand that it interacts with the vaccines. And it interacts with your drugs. It damages the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And so, they give them these drugs and they interact and they drop dead. And the interesting thing is that I went to the hospital one day with pneumonia. And I'd written for the National Health Federation an article called, Rot Gut Aspartame Methanol Mania. And I had 1,000 reprints made out of it. And I kept giving it to the hospital, to the doctors. And the doctors knew nothing about it. And they kept bringing in more doctors and more nurses and the pharmacists so people would understand how bad it was. And yet they turned around, not realizing that when they gave me prescriptions, that because of insurance, they fill them generically and that aspartame was just in about every one of them. And I stopped breathing on 3 occasions. And then they turned around and gave me more prescriptions with aspartame in it. So people have to worry about going to the hospitals. And even though this may not be on the subject, while I was there, they used an endoscopic, and they're made by Olympus. And they knew that they could not be cleaned, and they give you E. coli blood, which is what I had. And about 80% of the people die. In fact, if they came in, they said, I don't even know why you're alive. And I says, I think it's from the prayers from my husband. But, they don't tell you we did it to you. And they give you C. diff with all these dangerous drugs. And so it's, I finally wrote an article about it called Iconogenesis, Aspartame, Scopes, and E. coli. And it's on the website, and people should really read it before they go to the hospital because you have no idea. I mean, if somebody like me who's been in research 50 years, they almost killed me, and I had, so much knowledge and was actually educating them on aspartame while they were trying to poison me on aspartame. So you've got to be very careful and take responsibility for your own health.
I know that hospitals are one of the most dangerous places. Today is the anniversary of the death of my second son. I was with him in the hospital for months on end, 24/7, because he had cancer from vaccines. And he died because of the chemotherapy 3 weeks before his 4th birthday, today, 33 years ago. So I lived in that hospital and I saw everything. And it was so illogical what was being done there that I always wondered, how come that these doctors do these stupid things? But I then saw how they are educated. And it's a mind control program with sleep deprivation and bad food. And oh God, it's horrible.
Well, I've even spoken to the doctors about, writing a book for medical students, because Big Pharma gets in there and make sure that they don't get the right information.
Exactly. And that has been orchestrated by the Rockefeller Foundation since 1910 with the Flexner Report. That is when everything that was natural healing was phased out of all medical schools.
You're right. You're right.
And I have a book by Morris A. Beale, the drug story, and he shows there that even universities not in America, but in the Netherlands, for instance, Leiden and Utrecht, they got funds. The one got 24,000 something and the other 36,000 something dollars. And with those amounts of money, they sold their souls to the devil.
Yes, and there's always somebody with their hand out. They'll always do it.
But indeed, the funds that the Rockefellers were giving out, they had this restriction that hospitals who took it and universities who took it, they were not supposed to do anything natural after that again.
And they're trying to get rid of our supplements as well.
Oh, yes, definitely. And the AMA, the American Murder Association, Medical Association, they have been founded in 1847 to get rid of homeopathy. And now in the Netherlands, distributors of homeopathic products are not supposed to put on the label where the product is being used, how the product should be used. For what ailment. So they still are working at getting rid of homeopathy.
And it's a shame because it's a wonderful, wonderful.
Absolutely.
I just had some of it done. They put some, it's a homeopathic product in my knee and it regrows synovial fluid. So yes, I'm very familiar with homeopathy and how wonderful it is. And that's what they're trying to do, to get rid of the supplements or make them so low that they won't do anything.
That it's ridiculous. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So you have to be very, very knowledgeable these days to stay healthy, because apart from the fact that they add aspartame and MSG and all that other stuff into our food supply, the vegetables don't have the nutrients anymore in them that used to be there when nobody interfered with agriculture.
Now we have genetic engineering, and aspartame, incidentally, is genetically engineered with E. coli.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. I call it satanic, this way of thinking. Yeah.
Satanic. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's awful. This Dr. Roberts, is he still alive?
He died about 3 years ago.
Okay.
But he left me his 30 years of research.
Whoa.
And on his dying bed, he asked me to continue his work. And so I was thinking, at my age that, and I had been ill for quite a while, and at my age, but I gave him my word I would continue until I got it off the market. So I'm still at it.
Well, maybe that will guarantee you to become 150 years old.
Yes, and how long it's taking me. And then the FDA, they are so bad. I filed a petition to ban. Listen to this. This was in 2002. And they have 180 days to answer. And they, of course, haven't done so, except they sent a note saying that we have more important things to do.
Oh,
anyway, yeah. So in 2007, I filed an imminent health hazard, which gives them about a week and 10 days to answer. And of course, they didn't do it then either. Then in the year 2009, 9 scientists from the FDA, wrote Congress and Obama and said that they were completely broken, and it's on our website, and that they couldn't make a decision, that Big Pharma had just taken over the FDA, basically, is what they were trying to say. So I get a call late at night. My husband answers the phone, says, the FDA wants to talk to you. I said, really? I said, what do you guys want? Well, because of Obama, we're supposed to answer everything from 2007. And I said, you mean my imminent health hazard you were supposed to answer 2 years ago? Or how about in 2002? And he says, well, it's not going to happen. I said, listen, I lecture all over the world, and people are sick and dying everywhere from this chemical poison. And his answer to me, Dr. Michael Delaney, was, so what? We need to depopulate. What I should have said was, you first. So that's the FDA. They really just don't care. And as long as, Big Pharma and them, give them money and jobs, they don't care about the public. They just, there were a few good ones, and they tried to do something. And here it is, 2016, and they've never done anything since that admission in 2009.
No, the only way that something can change is from the bottom up. When enough people stop buying these crazy products, then it will stop. But that means that everybody has to be aware of what is happening. And too many people are so dumb that they don't care.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Anybody who doesn't care basically joins the standpoint of the FDA.
Actually, I said from the beginning, I said, if you don't buy it, they can't sell it. Several of the companies have now gone out of business. And the other day, one of the newspapers wrote that this was like the 10th year where diet drinks had gone down. They're getting to the point that they can't sell them. And it says they're going back to sugar. Now, Pepsi took out aspartame. And Michael Fox, that got Parkinson's, the movie star, was a Diet Pepsi spokesman and was addicted to it. And when his arms swung around, like I was saying, the first patient I'd seen with it, it was because of the interaction of his L-Dopa with it. Then they turn around and they put Splenda in there. And you have to know that Splenda is another chemical poison. It started out as an insecticide, and it still is. In fact, I found it on the website still under insecticide and pointed it out. When I did that, they moved it over to sweetener. So,
of course.
And Dr. Safredi just did a study on it about a year ago, but he just had it peer reviewed, showing that it's a carcinogen. So they all violate the Delaney Amendment. In other words, they're illegal. You have a sulfame potassium, which caused cancer and leukemia in original studies, and they let that one go as well. In fact, I was in a store once, and I saw some sulfame potassium, and it's called Sunette. And I said, this is a health food store, and this is poison. So they called the company and said, we want you to come pick this up. So anyway, I get this call from Dr. Abe McCall. He said, this is Dr. McCall from the Sunette Company. We want you to know that even though sulfame potassium caused mammary tumors, he says it didn't cause brain tumors like aspartame. I said, let me tell you something. I don't want breast cancer either. And you're not telling me the truth, because I know it caused cancer and leukemia, and it's in the medical books. So don't give me that. Well, anyway, he hung up, and I told that to many people, and I get a recorder message from Dr. McCall, and he says, I didn't tell you that you could tell people that it causes cancer. So in other words, that's the opinion of all these people, is that, we'll just keep it a secret. And it was just like in the case of Splenda, this man had a brain tumor. They gave him 6 months to live. He got off aspartame, and the brain tumor started going away. So he got on Splenda and then had a grand mal seizure. And his wife was so upset, called the company, and they said, no, it's safe. And she just gave him such a hard time. They finally said, well, yes, it did cause seizures. But why didn't you tell the FDA? Well, there weren't that many. In other words, they've always got an excuse, and they always had this stuff. And the best way to tell people to survive it is do not use processed food.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the problems, I was talking to someone who grew herbs in the Amazon rainforest for the pharmaceutical companies, until the pharmaceutical companies became so dangerous, he quit. And I says, we've got a real problem. People think they're supposed to use these sweeteners. And the thing of it is that when they get off of it, they get off aspartame and the problems go away, then they tell me, what can we use? Well, if they go from aspartame to Splenda, Dr. Bowen says because of the chemical hypersensitization, the fact it's a poison, they maintain the reactions of aspartame and pick up those in Splenda. Same thing with the sulfine potassium. So he says, okay, I'll make one. And he did. So there is one safe one called Just Like Sugar. And it's made out of organic food. And you can go to their website, justlikesugar.com, and you can click on the Just Like Sugar story, and you'll hear about that. You'll see Shatner, who had a TV program for people who do great things for America, and gave the Just Like Sugar Company an award for making the first safe sweetener in America. And then you'll hear him talk about our conversation. And they make things like hot chocolate. I had stopped using hot chocolate years ago because they had like 76 chemicals in them. And so they made one with nothing but pure vanilla bean and pure organic dark chocolate. And it's just wonderful. It tastes like food should taste like. So there is one company that does have a safe sweetener, and that's about the only one that I know. A lot of people use stevia, but Dr. Blaylock does say it causes hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
So and in Brazil, they add aspartame to it. So anything you use, it has to be pure.
Yeah. Well, they will try to sneak it in anyway and everywhere, because I know about monosodium glutamate that the producer said, I don't mind what we have to call it, but into the food chain it goes.
Right. It's an excitotoxin, and it excites the neurons of the brain to death, causing brain damage. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Blaylock wrote a book on it called Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. Mm-hmm. And on our website, you'll see the famous Dr. John Oney's report to the Board of Inquiry on aspartame. And it says the bad thing about this with children is that it has an additive and synergistic effect, and birth defects are given. And so the FDA told Dr. Oney back then that no child would ever use it. And when I first started, I couldn't believe it. Aspartame was even in tempera little drops to put in a baby's mouth. Just imagine feeding a baby a neurotoxin to destroy.
Yeah, with this developing brain and all that, on top of the vaccines that have the same effect.
Right, and that interact with the aspartame.
Yeah.
So a lot of SIDS deaths are actually aspartame and from the vaccines. And a really good story about that, you can just Google it. It's on my website, but it's called, if you just Google it, the artificially sweetened horror story. And it's about an 8-week-old baby that died of SIDS, and that was the reason. And she explains how you go to the doctor, the baby's sick, they give them something like pediatric augmentin, and it's got aspartame, and then you go to the drugstore and you get some cough syrup that's got it in it, and the next day the baby doesn't wake up. And some years ago, there was a pediatric organization that says something is killing the babies, and we want to know what it is. And Big Pharma said they would stop making these cough syrups and things that little babies don't need, and they never did, because I still see them on the market. So they just lied about it. Yeah,
they pay lip service and do whatever they were doing before. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is not about the health of patients. It's not about the well-being of people that pharmaceutical companies are there. They have this policy of a slow kill business model.
Right, exactly. You do understand the system.
I certainly do, yes.
And, we try to make a difference. We do all we can. And there's some people that are hard headed and won't even listen.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's just a shame. In fact, Lane Shore, who is our Mission Possible Chicago, has lost 20 members of his family from
Oh,
aspartame.
wow. Yeah, but that is always the problem. If you are the one in a family who tells this story that is new and it is strange and it is too unbelievable to be true, then you're the idiot and we just keep doing what we're doing,
You
even
know,
if we die.
one thing I do not understand, I can remember when I got pregnant with my first child. If someone had told me, look, don't use that, it causes birth defects, I wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole.
No.
And yet, in one case, somebody in his family was unable to get pregnant, and that's because they were drinking Diet Coke, and it causes infertility. So they went to a fertility clinic, and after some years was able to get pregnant. And so Lane told him, he said, look, he said, this causes birth defects. You can lose your 2 babies. And she just was furious that he even told her that. And so one of the babies died. She kept on using it. And the other baby was just clinging to life. And the other baby's still alive, but they almost lost that as well. They don't listen. And surely they can understand. You can get on Google and put in aspartame dangers and get millions of hits and millions of articles. And everything's a matter of public record. The congressional hearing, even Dr. Verrett, who was the other FDA toxicologist that testified before Congress, she testified in 1987, and understand that they put aspartame on the market in 1981. And she says this is 1987 and it still hasn't been proven safe because it can't be. And when I moved to this house, first thing I did was take some flyers and take them to everybody's house on the street so everybody in the neighborhood would get off. And when I went across the street, I went to hand a man the flyer, and he jumped back and he said, aspartame's poison. I said, I know it is. That's what I'm telling you. And I said, but how did you know? He says, I built the aspartame factory down here. And he said that he says that in 1973, when they originally approved it, he said they went on and were making it long before it was approved in 1981. So it's really been on the market since 1973. He said it almost killed him. He said it's the worst, horrible. He said it's nothing but toxic waste. And that reminds me, one day somebody called me from the Augusta plant and said he was very sick. I said, well, I'm glad you called since you're down there making it. What are you making it out of? He says, I don't know, lady. He said, the only thing we have down here is toxic waste. And so that's what aspartame really is. Is
it an industry that has to get rid of its toxic waste? Because this sounds to me like the way they put fluoride into the water supply. They had to get rid of the fluoride because,
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that the aspartame factory closed down. And somebody said, it was on some kind of a blog, said, boy, what I could tell you went on here. He says, but I signed a paper that I would never tell. And so another man got on there and he says, well, I didn't sign any paper. And I want to tell you, they were putting this toxic waste in the water. So, they were doing all kinds of things that were against the law. And they just pay off the people that find out about it. Yeah. And they just keep on doing it and just killing people everywhere you go. When I was in New Zealand, all the kids there, they told me had neurological problems. The interesting thing in New Zealand is only about 4 million people. And I lectured for about 3 weeks. And I'm sure that I was on most of the media there in Christchurch and in Wellington and all the different cities and in the newspapers and the medical journals. And they couldn't put out the fire. And you'd be walking down the street and someone would come up and said, I know who you are. You're the anti-aspartame people. And I went there because of Abby Cormack, who is a beautiful actress who almost died from it. And they would say, I had the same symptoms as Abby. I got off of it and all my symptoms went away. And their profits went down to such a degree that Coke sent one of their flacks over there to debate Abby Cormack. I'm not sure they ever got their profits up, but they dropped immediately because when they saw it constantly on TV and radio every day, and I was lecturing in the medical schools, they couldn't put out the fire. And so, all of a sudden they woke up well from horrible things.
But I wonder if a thing like that is still possible, because what I see with the mainstream or the lamestream media is that they sort of bonded together because they are more or less owned by the same people.
Exactly.
Only 5 companies in the United States, for instance, but that the restrictions that journalists what journalists can and will write is so heavy-handed, regulated, that
you can't get out the truth.
Exactly. Yeah, you can write an article about it today, but it will not be published because there will always be an editor saying, we're not going to do that.
Well, there's something else that people should know about aspartame, and I really think it has a lot to do with all the crime that you see. Aspartame is a psychodrug, and it depletes serotonin, and it causes psychiatric and behavioral problems, and it interacts with all antidepressants. And so, for instance, I got a call one day from a Dr. Barrick, and you can read about this in Dr. Robert's medical text. And when he called me, he said, I had to change the diet of 360 children. And he said they were all drinking milk, and we thought they were so young they might get diabetes. And he said, so I changed it to aspartame juice. He said, if it had been 10% or 20% or even 50% of the kids that were affected, but he said it was almost 100%, they became hyper, they had behavioral problems, they didn't know what they were doing. And he said, and so, I knew the only thing I had given them was aspartame. And he said, so I put it into Google and came up with your name. And I said, well, doctor, for God's sakes, get them off of it right away. And he called me back 4 days later. He says, would you believe that they all went back to normal?
Whoa.
So in other words, you wouldn't dare do a study on children because it destroys their brain. But this was done accidentally. Mm-hmm. And the thing of it is, it's causing suicidal tendencies and interacts with the drug, and it causes them to do horrible things. It's a big trigger of bipolar. When people get bipolar, you think of Michael Douglas and his wife both use Diet Coke, and I sent records to them. So many of the movie stars adopt, they're drinking Diet Coke, trying to stay slim, when in fact, if you want to get fat, NutraSweet is where it's at. And
it's always the opposite, huh?
Yeah, it's just, in fact, they went to the Federal Trade Association, several organizations recently, and asked them to do something about the fact that they could market it as diet when actually it makes you crave carbohydrates so you gain weight. And one of the worst studies done is the Traco study. And I went to Barcelona and met with Dr. Alemany, who did it. But before he said, hello, Betty, I'm Dr. Alemany, first thing he said to me was, Betty, he said, aspartame will murder 200 million people. And I said, Dr. Alemany, it already has. And so he was telling me that in the study, that the methanol converts to formaldehyde and embalms all living tissue and damages DNA. When you damage DNA, you can destroy humanity.
Yep.
You want to know why I'm still doing this is to save as many as we can, because it's a terrible, terrible thing. They tried to assassinate his character. The NutraSweet people did, and he said all these horrible things happened because he did that study. And he said every country should have to do the Traco study. But he says probably every country has. It's just that they do these studies in foreign countries so that nobody will know about it and won't get published.
Yeah.
And so when I was on a radio program once in Miami, this translator called me and she said, I translated studies in 6 countries, Mexico and Belize, Argentina, and said they took people from poor areas, gave them a lot of aspartame. He said it destroyed their brain. They had seizures, they had brain tumors. And she says, I don't think there are any survivors. The pregnant woman hemorrhaged and lost her baby and disappeared. So that's how, and then I mentioned it to another toxicologist. He said, Betty, did you not know that's the way that all pharmaceutical companies, that they do studies in foreign countries, that way they know how dangerous they are and how much they got to pay off Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get away with all this stuff. And how in the world do you stop them? I'll tell you something that happened some years ago, which helped us start operations in many countries. I had lectured for the World Environmental Conference, and I hadn't thought much of it. I was, and I had the FDA report that I have here that's 92 symptoms that the FDA admitted to. And when I was there, I began to explain these different things that the FDA even admitted to, like headache, dizziness, change in mood, vomiting, abdominal pain, blindness, diarrhea, seizures, memory loss, fatigue. It just went on and on. The people were jumping up in the air and they said, I got it, I got it, I got it. They had all these problems. So when I came back, I got on a list of neurologists. And I really was arguing with him over the fact that it mimics and precipitates MS. And so they argued, no, it doesn't. And so Dr. Blaylock, being a neurosurgeon, I said, listen, I can't get these bozos to understand that aspartame does this. And he said, well, he said, neurologists are the worst. I'll write them. So here's this prominent, renowned neurosurgeon who writes a paper for me on MS and aspartame, and I put it on the list. They still don't believe it.
No.
Dr. Roberts writes a paper on it, and I put it on there. Now, keeping in mind, this is coming from world-renowned doctors, and these neurologists still not believing it. So finally, I got so upset. I said, look, I just lectured for the World Environmental Conference. And I says, now that, and I just want to tell you what else it causes. And I go through this whole list. And it's a moot point today. Because of it, Dr. Roberts wrote that medical text and dedicated it to me. Because I had listed all the, thyroid, hypothyroidism, and hypothyroidism and MS and lupus and all these different things that it causes, and didn't think anything about it. But I took the post and put it on web. Well, somebody took it off our website and put their name on it by the name of Nancy Markle. Mm-hmm. And it went viral because people didn't know if it was true or not, but they said, well, if they were in a wheelchair and they had MS, and they're using it every day, they thought, well, gee, I'll just get off of it. And they did, and walked out of their wheelchairs. And people with seizures, the seizures stopped. And the behavioral problems in children went away. And it continued to go around the world. Now, when I say viral, I don't mean just it went to a lot of people. I meant for 2 years. I don't have call waiting or call interruption, I call it. ever since, this was in 1999, because the phone would ring every 2 minutes and there was no way to answer, to talk to anybody any length of time. And it got to the place that, for instance, at 4 in the morning, people from Australia would call. And
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
when I went to bed at night, my husband would say, okay, who's going to take the Nancy Markle side? Because somebody had to sleep and somebody had to talk on the phone all night. And Hong Kong called at some, obscene time. And this was going around and people were quietly getting well. And that's when sometime after that is when Corey Brackett called me. And she said, I was in a wheelchair for years. I gained 50 pounds. I had one of the largest lesions ever diagnosed in an MS victim. And she said, I could neither talk nor walk hardly. And she said, after I read this article, she says, I walked out of my wheelchair. And 8 months later, the large lesion all but disappeared. And she said, a movie needs to be made of it. And I said, tell me about it. She said, honey, I own the film company. And I'm on my way to your house. And people to this day still call about it. And the stories were incredible. Like one person went to a funeral home to prepare for his funeral and found the Nancy Markle thing, they called it, sitting there that said, I just lectured for the World Environmental Conference and all this, and decided not to make his funeral after all, went home, got off of it and got well. And the stories, if I ever had time to write a book, are hard to believe. Even as I told you, in my own family, trying to convince people, and they don't take it really serious. So we have family in another city in Michigan, and I'd sent information to everybody, and finally my husband's cousin comes to Atlanta one day. She comes in the house and she said, we're on our way to Florida. We wanted to drop by just for a minute, let you know William Reed is dying, or maybe he's already dead. And but they're planning the funeral, and we'll stop by on the way back. And I said, wait a minute, Mary Lee, don't go so fast. Why is William dying? She said, well, he's having 6 or 8 seizures a day. I said, is he on NutraSweet? Maybe he's a diabetic using a lot of it, and he's going blind, has MS symptoms. He said, well, yes, he does. I said, well, call him and tell him he doesn't have to die, get off of it. He says, but he may be already dead. They're planning the funeral. So anyway, I said, Mary Lee, call him or I will. So she gets on the phone and she says, William, this Mary Lee, just wanted to tell you, Betty said you didn't have to die anyway. Said, just get off of NutraSweet. So anyway, Mary Lee went on to Florida and came back about a week later. And she says, I want to tell you something before I leave. She said, if I hadn't stopped in Atlanta, William would be dead. But she said, as soon as he got off of it, the seizure stopped. And she says they all broke down and cried. All of his symptoms disappeared. And he would have been dead if I hadn't stopped by your house on the way to Florida.
Oh, wow.
And so my husband went to see him about 4 years ago. That was about 18 years ago, and he's still alive today. So you can just imagine how many people, just because of the post even, and they would spread it to other people. And one woman had MS so bad, she said she stopped working. And then she said she had to make a living. So she got a job filing because she couldn't use her mind like she could, because it destroys the brain. And she said she opened a file drawer and there was the Nancy Markle thing and got off of it. And she said, got well. These stories came in from countries all over the world in languages I couldn't even speak. And these people ended up setting it up in, setting up Mission Possible operations in their country and taking everything from our website and translating it into their languages, just like Ed has done in Holland. I'll have to introduce you to it.
Yeah.
And they have just done a wonderful job. But, that was in 1999. And even today, I still get calls about it. And that's what the medical text you have is based on. The fact that I lectured for the World Environmental Conference and exposed all the diseases, and Dr. Roberts wrote about them. And I told him, I said, please give the mechanism by which each disease is triggered or facilitated by aspartame, and he has done that. And it's one of the things the FDA told me. He says, you didn't show us what the mechanism is, so they're getting the medical text. And said, oh, I want to see you get out of it now.
Yeah, right.
It's all, and I see aspartame through Dr. Roberts' eyes is the reason that I know so much of it, because he trained me for 20 years.
Yeah. I was in Spain. It suddenly comes to me. I was in Spain on holiday, and I went to have a coffee on a terrace. And in Spain, it's not usual that you join a table where somebody is sitting that you don't know. But every seat was taken, and I was on my own, and there were 3 more chairs around the table, and I saw a man coming. He wanted to have a coffee or something too. So I gestured to him, come sit here. And we started talking, and he ordered a Diet Coke. And then I said to him, when he had the Diet Coke, I asked him, do you drink this often? Yeah. Said, do you have any eye problems? Yes. Why do you ask? I said, well, you're taking a poison here that will take out your eyesight. You almost dropped the glass. And I said to him, well, you don't have to promise me anything, but promise yourself this thing. Promise yourself that this is your last glass of Diet Coke. And he had an operation on his eyes 2 weeks before or something. So I scared him witless because I immediately pinpointed it. And don't ask me why I started about his eyesight. I mean, that was my intuition, maybe. I don't know, but it was right on the dot.
Well, that's what, you remember during Prohibition, the wood alcohol that blinded thousands and killed them. And of course, that's exactly what's in aspartame. And it was just the right thing. It was just the right thing to say. And talking about Spain, today, our Mission Possible Spain, as I told you, many of our operations are because they were victims. And this woman, Annie Davies, emailed me. And aspartame, I told you, causes sudden cardiac death. And what it does is it causes an irregular heart rhythm. It interacts with all cardiac medication, and it damages the cardiac conduction system and causes sudden cardiac death. Well, this woman, 65% of her heart was destroyed. And she said she was not even able to go anywhere except by ambulance. In other words, she couldn't sit up. She could not walk. And she got off of it. And the lady who lived with her had a brain tumor, who was also, they were both on aspartame. And so finally, she wrote me and said that the brain tumor her friend had when she got off of it had disappeared, and that she could now sit up. She was in a wheelchair. And so I went to Spain to meet her. And it was the nicest thing, because she said, I want to show you, that I can walk. Mm. And she was up and she was walking around, and she met us we went in by ship, and she met us, and there was a taxi cab driver that brought her. I knew she had no money. She'd been unable to work ever since she'd been on this. Yeah. And I took him aside and I said, look, I want to pay you because I don't want Annie to have to pay you to come pick us up. And he said, Annie will never have to pay me. And I said, really? She said that we had one child, a little girl, and the doctor said that my wife could not ever have any more children. Remember, I told you that it causes infertility. Yeah. Because it's an income-disrupting drug. He says, and Annie told me to tell her to get off the diet drink. And he says, and now I have a son.
Oh, for a Spaniard to have a son, yeah.
Right. And he said, and Annie will never have to pay me as a driver.
Real. Oh, gee, what a beautiful stories. Yeah.
And incidentally, then right afterwards, some documentary people came from Spain and made an incredible documentary, and it's on our website under aspartame videos if you ever want to see it.
Oh, okay,
I
yeah.
forgot what they called it, and it's well, the part with me and it's in English, and the other part's in Spanish. But I guess you can speak Spanish, and so it's sort of half and half. You have the FDA lying as usual, but other than that, it's a very, very fine. And in fact, remember I told you the story of Jerome Bressler, and he had retired from the FDA, and he basically was dying, and he wanted so bad those studies. So before he died, I sent him to Lane Shore in Chicago, and we added them back to the Bressler report, which is on a banner on our website, and told him that they'd been added back for the world to see, and gave him a copy of it. And then he died. And so when the documentaries went to Chicago, excuse me, they went to his grave site and took a picture of it.
Okay.
Very, very fine documentary.
Yeah, you're still having trouble with your pneumonia. Yeah. About the people that cannot hear the truth of what you're telling them, what you're saying. Today I was at a Lyme conference in the Netherlands, and one speaker told us about a scientist who asked for proof of a certain aspect. He got the proof, and then he said this famous last words like, "Yeah, and even if it's the truth, I don't believe it."
We get some of those sometimes. Unfortunately, they pay with their lives, and it's a shame.
Yeah.
President Reagan lost his memory from it. He was using the stuff. Interestingly, he came to Atlanta one day. He was interviewed by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and they said, President Reagan, you know, it was because of you that aspartame got on the market. Do you still use it? He said, no. He said that we found out some things about it after I got it approved, and we don't use it anymore. But it was too late. You know, it destroyed his memory.
Yes, and he didn't tell the people about it, that he stopped using it after having approved it.
Right,
should have done that. Yeah.
That's it's still online in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Okay.
No, it's an old article, but the fact that he found out too late.
Yeah. Yeah. So even presidents are being kept in the dark about some things. So yeah, we live in an upside down world where the truth is often obfuscated,
yeah,
and buried and denied and all sorts of things.
And I hate to give you some more bad news, but now they've approved advantame, at least in the United States. I don't know if it's in Holland yet. But
I don't know.
You need to find out about it, because
what's the name exactly?
It's advantame, ADVANTAME. It appears to me that it's probably worse than aspartame, because it's made half of it with aspartame, and the other half is made with vanillin. And vanillin is normally made with aspartame too, and has shown interaction. And I can just see that it's going to be the most horrible, horrible thing to happen. And they did a big expose on it in Australia, and I think I still have it somewhere on my website. But it's bad news, and they've got neotame out there, which is not labeled. And, you know, they make things in smaller amounts so they don't have to label them, or they put them under artificial and natural flavors. And that's where you'll find things like MSG and aspartame. So if you see natural or artificial flavors, you know, or ingredients that you can't pronounce, Remember Dr. Roberts' words, when in doubt, throw it out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, basically, it is the most simple truth in food and drink is when your great great grandmother doesn't understand it, don't use it.
Yes, well said. Well said.
Yeah, I keep that as the shortest way of pointing out to people what to do when they go to the supermarket.
Yes. It's actually all the cures of our grandparents that we learn that really work, you know?
Absolutely, yes, because they used substances from nature that are have been talking to us, speaking to our genes and to our cells for ages. These are the substances from nature, the reason why we are still here.
Yes, and I'll tell you something that was done. One time, Dr. Roberts came to our house, and we were having a meeting, and Don was telling him about a formula that I had. And I had breast cancer, and I used these herbs and cured it and didn't think anything about it. And I had to find somebody who grew herbs. And he grew herbs like his father and his grandfather before him. And I gave him the formula, and he gave them to about 1,000 people. And it's often very hard to get people. You know, I said, look, I give away the formula free. And I said in Genesis 1:29, it says, here I am giving you all green vegetation, and it shall serve as food for you. And it doesn't say a thing about FDA regulation.
No.
And I said, the only thing I ask of anyone is that if you're cured of cancer, please let me know. Yeah. Well, Earl had, most people, don't like to write, but he had 800 letters of people that the doctors had turned away that were dying, that were cured on this formula of mine. So Dr. Roberts wrote a paper about me that I didn't know was being written. And you can just Google it. It's called Profile of a Super Volunteer Activist. And in it, he puts the ingredients. And I said, oh, my word, Dr. Roberts. I said, the FDA is going to be on my front porch. Well, the FDA did something a whole lot worse. They found out, and they went up and they sprayed and killed every herb on his place. And then went up into the mountains because the black snake root, which is what really kills cancer, grows sort of on a mountain, spraying everywhere.
Oh, God.
And what the FDA had done was they sent the forestry. And so one of the men was dying, and he told Earl, he said, I had to come by and apologize to you. The FDA made us do it, and they told us they simply couldn't have cancer cured.
Yeah.
So I was so furious about it. Dr. Caldwell wrote a book called The Only Answer to Cancer, and it's on my website. And so he asked me to write about aspartame and cancer, which I did. And then I gave this cure for cancer, which I named after my mother, the Eve Geller Memorial Cancer Formula, because she went through chemotherapy and a hysterectomy and radiation, and killed her. And all she had was a tiny little nodule of cancer. And 25 years to the day of her death, I had a little nodule in mine. And the difference was I knew that chemotherapy had killed her. And so I got this formula and I put it in the book. So even though the herbs, would be hard to get, but I probably could find them if I had to. But anyway, so people would always have the cure for cancer, but it is in there. The only answer to cancer is the cure. And the FDA is so bad that I wrote what they did. And that, if that wasn't enough, Earl went and since they destroyed his herbs, he went somewhere else and bought some others. And the FDA came and confiscated like $140,000 worth. $75,000, and then expunged the record so nobody would know what they did. And so I wrote that in the new upcoming updated book of what the FDA did, so that they will, maybe that we can't get them prosecuted for such a heinous crime, but the world will know what they did, that there is a cure for cancer and there's no reason for anyone to die from it. All you've got to do is purify the blood and the cancer dies.
Yep.
That's the secret.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I agree. And that is what Ty Bollinger is doing right now, giving this sort of information out into the world about cancer. And I found in the books that I have of old doctors of the previous century, they talk about that it's toxins in the body that give cancer. And they point fingers at vaccination.
Yes.
Very clearly. There is a doctor in Indianapolis who said, I have seen 200 patients with cancer, but I never saw a patient who had not been vaccinated with cancer. Only the vaccinated people. And then we're talking about cowpox vaccinations. And that's the whole rigmarole of Mr. Jenner, who is a big liar. Oh, gosh. And that is the foundation, one of the foundations of the vaccine idea of today. So we are being tricked and lied to, and it is really awful.
You know, Dr. Blaylock one day, you remember the N1S1 flu material, and he called me up and he said, Betty, you got to warn pregnant women right away. The FDA says pregnant women and children first, and if they're pregnant, it will kill their baby. And I told you, Dr. Blaylock is a brilliant doctor.
Yep.
And so I didn't have much time because they had already said that on TV. But I turned around and I put it on all my, list everywhere. And it was just so tragic because even within that first week, 35 women called me and said as soon as they took it, they lost their baby.
Yes.
And Dr. Blaylock is also written now. You can Google that too. Just Dr. Russell Blaylock, flu vaccines and Alzheimer's. And he says if you take a few flu shots, then you're open to Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
There's another thing that people don't know, and this really, really bugs me, that they would allow such a horrible thing. But here in Atlanta, you could just go to any CVS drugstore or grocery store, and there'll be a sign, get your shingles vaccine here.
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. Blaylock says it's a live virus. It will give you the shingles.
Yeah,
I told that to Dr. Roberts' sister who lives close by me. And she says, now you tell me. She says, I got the shingles virus. And she said a week later got the shingles. And she said, I have suffered with neurological problems ever since. And then I had a woman call me that wanted me to go to her hometown to help her child at the fair about something about aspartame. And I didn't take the shot, of course, but my husband got it. And I didn't know that it was contagious. And
yeah, it is. Live viruses are being shed all over the place. Yeah.
And it wasn't until later when I read Dr. Blaylock's paper that he said that it was a Nazi thing and that that people were getting shingles from vaccinated children, is what he said. Mm-hmm. And so I told the woman, that I didn't feel comfortable being around children with the shingles. And she says, well, please let me come over. And I said, well, if you want to do that and you want to take this risk, I'm telling you, I have it. And she says, I know. She says, my aunt took the shingles virus and a week later she got it. And so I'm always warning, and it causes a lot of other things, the shingles virus. It's just terrible.
Yeah, it's nasty. Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, what people don't realize is that many vaccines, after you have been vaccinated, you are shedding whatever pathogen is in there. And that is why small babies get whooping cough, because they get it from vaccinated children around them.
And if you think about it, of course, when I was a little girl, they didn't give you 30 vaccines. They just gave you whooping whooping cough, I think measles, mumps, whatever it was, 3 or 4 of them. But as I think back, even though that, we were given this vaccine, I still got all those diseases.
I don't think you got the vaccines for those illnesses because they started only after 1960 or something with that stuff. I don't know exactly the exact dates of these vaccines, but I never had a measles vaccine. And I had the measles, I had the mumps, I had it all, and it was just great because I didn't have to go to school, and my mother was pampering me. I could read books. It was lovely being sick, except for the first few days when you feel very lousy. But then it was a party. It was fun.
Well, I went to school in the 40s. I'm a lot older than you are. And
Yeah.
that's when they gave was it chicken pox, I think they gave you. And
Did it then?
yes, they did. And I had the
Geez.
chicken pox.
I had as a baby, because I went from the Netherlands to the Dutch Indies at 3 months old, I got a smallpox vaccine, which is cowpox, really.
Right, and I got that too.
Yes, and it gave me, how you say that, a herpes virus.
Herpes virus?
Yeah, but Epstein-Barr.
Epstein-Barr, yeah.
Yeah. So I was.
Aspartame causes that too.
Yeah, but I was always sick, and then not, and then again, and not. Yeah. So.
Well, let me tell you about Epstein-Barr, since you've had this, is that I once did some research for the CDC, and I was working with the hematologist, and they were looking for the cure for leukemia. And so they asked me would I help their research, and I said, sure. And as it turned out, to make a long story short, I said, the way that you get it is through the Epstein-Barr virus. And they said, we know. I said, you know? Have you had me do all this research, you know? Yeah, I said, well, when are you going to tell the public? They said, we're not. And I said, why not? They said, mass hysteria. I said, well, let me tell you what, mass hysteria is a whole lot better than death. And it's not that people that have Epstein-Barr get leukemia. It's that people that are around Epstein-Barr people get leukemia. And the interesting thing about it, and I told the hematologist I was working with, and he put up a lot of notices and whatnot. And someone, and then when Cher got it, do you know who Cher is?
Yeah.
And so she was she was advertising aspartame for the NutraSweet company. And so I wrote her, I said, that's the reason you have Epstein-Barr. And so she wrote in Entertainment Tonight that she gave up the $900,000 fee, decided that NutraSweet was not good for her image. And she has Epstein-Barr today. She still has it. I'm trying to get through with it. But because it came up recently when they were talking about, when Cher was talking about it, I went to Google and put in Epstein-Barr and leukemia, and today it's actually on the web. You can actually find it. They will tell you that it causes leukemia, but they would not tell the public. I warned people back then. He said that's the reason most people who have it are usually teachers or not nurses, because they don't touch the body as much, but like practical nurses that are in touch with the body more so get leukemia from the Epstein-Barr virus.
Okay. But you can tell Cher that there is a way with homeopathy to solve the Epstein-Barr.
Yeah, I would imagine that there is homeopathy, just about for anything.
Yeah. And in the Netherlands, there was Tinus Smits. He was a homeopath, and he created a CEASE method, and that was CEASE. And that was a method to give nosodes of vaccines to get rid of the vaccine information in the body of the child. So you start with the last vaccine that they got, and then you work your way back to the first they ever got. And that apparently works well, but there's one but. It can be that the toxins that are in the vaccines are getting loose all at the same time because you give the nosode of the vaccine. So you have to really go gently when you undo the damage of the vaccines. But it has brought back children from autism to being a healthy, normal child.
Yes, there are some, you're right, some doctors that have been able to cure it. In fact, Spice Crosby is our Mission Possible Hollywood, and she has been able to cure it. And Dr. Carly,
Rebecca Carly,
Rebecca Carly, she does it as well.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
Yeah, she's great. She's a fighter as well. Yeah, feisty woman.
I've been on her radio program. Yeah, she's really great. And
yeah, she is.
Things. Yeah. Incidentally, I guess you've heard about how they've been knocking off the alternative medicine doctors.
Oh, yes. And yeah. One of them I knew, that was Nicolas Gonzalez. I knew him. I spoke with him. But it has to do with working with cancer in a non-mainstream way.
Right.
And one of the things that was involved was the Nagalaz GCMAF stuff. And Nagalaz is a substance that viruses can excrete that prevents the immune system from activating the macrophages to get rid of the cancer cells. And some viruses can make Nagalaz, but they also put it straight into vaccines, most probably. I mean, I can't say that for sure, but it's, if I have the idea, it probably has been done already.
Yes, I'm sure.
And many of these doctors worked with non-mainstream treatments for cancer, and they have been taken out. I mean, 13, 14, 15 of them already, some crazy number. They have been suicided and disappeared and whatever.
Yeah, one doctor made reservations to go on vacation. Then he just accidentally fell out the window.
Yeah.
Several things like that happened. And just recently I read about one. They killed a doctor, his wife, and his 5-year-old child.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely tragic that they get away with these heinous crimes, all in the name of money, God of money.
Yeah, and the point is that the public doesn't really bat an eyelid because they have been fed murder and crazy situations and bodies in which people are hacking and cutting and doing on television all the time. So they have been desensitized to tragedy.
I know, and I told you, I feel like a whole lot of it's due to aspartame because it's a psycho drug.
Yeah.
And you get people off of it and they come back to normal and they talk about what they lived under. When I was in New Zealand, one woman, she said that she had such panic attacks. She was 60 years old and she just now began to live. And that her husband was using Diet Coke and he hung himself, and that she'd put her head in the oven, and that she lost 6 babies, because it's an abortifacient, and the only one that survived is schizophrenic. And you see these kind of stories, and it just breaks your heart because, they kept it such a secret, and they have all these front groups that tell you, oh, it's a hoax. And you just want to shake them, because they're so demonic or satanic, and it's, they have caused such destruction and evil throughout the world.
Yeah. I think things like road rage.
Yes, that's
connected as well. Yeah.
Yes, that's connected to it.
Yeah.
And I know some of the worst cases. Dr. Lance when I was lecturing here in Atlanta, she called me. She says, I'm bringing my mother, and I hope that you will talk to her. Please, I've been trying to get her off of Diet Coke. And so after the lecture, I sat down and talked with her. And you'd look at her, and she was like in a different world. And she still was not able to get her mother off of it. She'd already had breast cancer. And Dr. Safredi has already shown that not only does aspartame cause breast cancer, but if the woman's pregnant and the child survives, because it does cause birth defects, that the child will grow up to have cancer. Anyway, they snatched her mother and put her in a mental hospital. And I can imagine why, because you would look at her and she just wasn't there. And they continued to let her have Diet Coke. Her mother couldn't get her out. Then they gave her psychiatric drugs, which interact, and she hung herself. And we have seen those cases one after another for years, while the FDA sits there and refuses to take it off the market and continues to put more dangerous sweeteners on the market. What they need to do is outlaw sweeteners, except for something just like sugar, which is made out of organic food. But anything that has artificial sweeteners in it should be removed from the market. Every one of them.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah, I have this sentence: my heart cries about what my research uncovers.
I know. Yes. I read such things. And like I say, I see the world through Dr. Roberts' eyes. And when I see things happen, I pretty much, I'll know what they're on. And I remember one time I was in the grocery store, and you could see the man, his hands were just shaking, which is what aspartame does, causes all these neurological problems. And he had filled up his cart, with Diet Coke. And I said, you must have all kinds of medical problems. He says, I don't have any medical problems. I said, yes, you do. He says, what do I have? I said, well, you're losing your sight. You've got joint problems. You've got male sexual dysfunction because it damages the hypothalamus of the brain. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got through, he picked up this 12-pack of Diet Coke and threw it at me. I kind of stood back. He says, how do you know my medical history? I said, I don't know your medical history. I know aspartame.
I see what you have in your cart. Yeah.
Yeah, I see what's in your cart. In fact, there was one woman. I'm kind of pushy sometimes because.
Oh, yeah, me too. I know that.
Just tragic. And I saw a woman filling up her basket with Diet Coke. And she was with a friend, and she was telling him, she says, well, I've been going to this doctor for 10 years. I can't get pregnant. And he said, well, maybe I should adopt. It's been 10 years. So I said, honey, it's the Diet Coke that you're drinking. And I always carried papers with me, and I gave her a paper. Meantime, I took all the Diet Coke out of the cart and put it back on the shelf. And the next thing I know, she's putting it back in there. I says, no, you don't understand. You cannot get pregnant as long as you're drinking Diet Coke, anything with aspartame. And so, this kept on and on. Finally, went to check out, and there she is back with it. I just picked it up and put it back on the shelf. So anyway, I moved from that part of town. I was back in that part of town about a year and a half later. And here comes this woman, and she's running down the street, and she's got this little blonde baby girl under her arm. And she said, you're the woman who took away my Diet Coke. I said, well, that would be me. And she said, I went and I told my doctor, the nerve of this woman telling me that I couldn't get pregnant because I was drinking Diet Coke. And he said, well, she didn't write this. This was written by Dr. H.J. Roberts. So he said, when she had the little girl, she says, I couldn't remember your name. And so the doctor says, well, why don't you name her after Dr. Roberts? So the doctor said that if I ever saw you again, to tell you there was a run on the name Roberta, because it was a fertility clinic and he got everybody off aspartame and everybody got pregnant. That's in the medical text you have, incidentally.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So one woman can make a huge difference.
Yes, if everybody would just, that's the reason I got all these doctors to write all these reports. Is so if you just forward the material, especially that one, rock cut aspartame methanol mania, that's one of the strongest articles I ever wrote. And I remember I was in the pharmacy one time, and this woman says, I've been trying to get my sister off for years. And I said, I bet she has everything in the book. She says, she does. She says, I have your 92, symptoms. So I keep making 1,000 reprints of this article. So I gave it to her. I said, give it to her. So anyway, I came back. I saw her again about 2 months later. I said, how's your sister? She says, drinking nothing but water. So that's one article you can forward that gets everybody off of it. Because what it does is it talks about Dr. Monty's, his medical text, While Science Sleeps, and how he tells how it turns your tissues to plastic. And even people in the funeral business tell me they use 25% less formaldehyde because it's
already there.
Yeah, they're pre-embalmed. And that's in the medical text too. And every doctor should have one of those medical texts. I can't imagine anybody practicing medicine without it. Because like Dr. Walton said, who's a psychiatrist, he said that they do, as soon as you see a patient, unless they do a history on what you're consuming, you can't get them well. And there is a doctor here that has a clinic that if you go to them, that's the first thing they say, are you using aspartame? If they say yes, they said, when you get off of it, come back. We will not see you while you're on it, because while you're on it, you're still poisoning yourself and we can't help you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's one awake doctor. Yeah.
Yes.
But they have to find out for themselves through people like you, because in their education, in their medical schools, it's not spoken about. Aspartame and vaccines are totally okay, and they are equipped with completely wrong knowledge.
I know somebody was visiting us that had been at a meeting of these vaccines. They were concerned because mercury's heavy, and whoever gets the shot in the bottom usually gets pretty sick. And so he was telling me, he said they had the manufacturer there, and he said the remedy was, they said, shake the bottle. And that's all they would do. They don't care. You can't sue them in America because they
no, they're totally immune. Yeah.
Immune to that. Yes,
it's amazing. How addictive is aspartame or Diet Coke, or is that? Because with some drugs, when you stop cold turkey, you get problems. But with aspartame, how does that work?
Well, first of all, a woman told me that she was on cocaine in high school, and it was harder to get off aspartame than cocaine. And the reason is methanol is classified as a narcotic, and it causes chronic methanol poisoning. And this affects the dopamine system of the brain and causes the addiction. And they go through some horrible, horrible withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
So some people get off of it cold turkey, and within a couple of weeks, they're fine. And there are others that just, we have to just tell them, take it, one day at a time, and keep lowering it down because they can't get off of it. And then some people have gotten back on it. Barbara Metzger is our Mission Hospital in New Jersey. And she has a daughter who, they come from a family of doctors and educators. And her daughter was, one of these straight A scholars and got scholarships and whatnot, got on Diet Coke. Said had such a complete personality change. She had seizures and was going blind. She was out riding motorcycles. And that's when she found Dr. Wortman, who goes from one side to the other. He's on the other side, and incidentally, he's got a home in Holland. And one of the documentarians called him, and He said it was only because he loved the Holland people that he would even talk to him, and he would negate it, everything he ever said. And I told him one day, I said, listen, Dr. Wortman, how do you negate this book you wrote on aspartame? So he took it off the market, but you can still get a used copy. Phenylalanine, it's on phenylalanine, and the studies that he did on that by Dr. Wortman. And she had letters from Dr. Wortman. And so she got in touch with me some years later because a nursery school was going to use nothing but aspartame products for their babies. And she just went bananas.
Yeah.
Honey, don't worry about it. I'll take care of that so quick. By the time they got my report, they were off of it. And then her daughter got back on it again, and we had to get her off again. So even after going through all that and changing it, and she was having seizures, she was losing her eyesight, going blind, she still, when she was handed a Diet Coke one day, she got back on it. We got her off, and she's okay today, but it's done a lot of damage to her body. So you just do it.
Yeah, it has to do probably, it's always an individual thing. It has to do with the ability of the body to detoxify. Also.
Yeah, the thing of it is it's cumulative. So we have Dr. Blaylock's detox, Dr. Caldwell's detox, and he said you have to use a lot of distilled water to flush out the system, but you still, you can't get the formaldehyde out. And formaldehyde causes cancer. It's a carcinogen. So in the end, so many of them get it. It's just tragic.
And where does the formaldehyde go? Into the tissues?
Yes, it embalms all living tissue.
Yeah. Because because I have a far infrared sauna. Let's say a cubicle, you sit in it, and you have two radiators at your feet emitting far infrared frequencies. It's light, but you cannot see it. You feel it as warmth. And it brings the water in your cells in vibration. And then everything that's in your cells that should not be there gets vibrated out, and you lose it. You get rid of it through your perspiration. So you can detoxify without your liver and your kidneys for 80% because it comes out through the skin.
Well,
maybe that would help.
Maybe it would. I wouldn't know. I once asked Dr. Blaylock, is there anything, and I can't think of the name that he told me. It was something like ellagic acid or something like that, but it's what's in walnuts. He said sometimes that will take just a little bit of the formaldehyde out, but not much. So that's the problem. And I don't know of anybody who has written about it as well as Dr. Monty in that book, While Science Sleeps, The Sweetener Kills. And if you read that book, it's like he sees through Dr. Roberts' eyes too. You can't put it down. He's such an incredible writer. And you wouldn't believe the things that people do. For instance, when they blew up his house some years ago, and I don't remember when that happened, but Dr. Monty was a food scientist in Arizona. In Arizona, it gets to be 117 degrees. So if you put Diet Coke out in front of a 7-Eleven, you got formaldehyde cocktails. So he tried to get a meeting to ban aspartame in Arizona. And I mean, he was fierce about it and quite a hero trying to get it done. And they kept denying it. And they sent lobbyists down. Well, finally, they gave him the meeting. And so the only way they stopped it, to show you how far they go, is they took a bill that had already passed on toxic waste and took out the bulk of the bill and put another bill in there that would stop any banning of aspartame.
A rider, they call that, huh?
Yeah, in other words, they just changed out the bill that had already passed because nobody would have signed it. So,
Hmm.
so you know, he has kept trying it. He was with the community institute, and he filed and took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And based on the fact that it causes seizures and that it causes blindness, and that was before my time. It was in 1986. And so I asked somebody, you know, how come that it wasn't taken off the market then? And they told me that it was a corrupt judge. And that's all I know. I don't even know his name, but you know that they would get to somebody somehow. And that's evidently what they did, because they'd made their case. And somebody that is on one of our lists said she was at the FDA meeting where they announced they were pulling it and taking it off the market. And then the judge stopped it in Chicago.
Yeah. I wonder how much money they paid this judge.
He may have a house in Holland too.
Yeah, well, it's not so fun anymore over here, so I wouldn't bother if I were them. But anyway, yeah. Well, I work with a neuropsychologist, John Konzenmulder, in Holland, and he wrote a book on aspartame, and the title in Dutch it's Sweet Revenge.
Oh, a good title.
Yeah, and he takes apart big pharma also, because and he shows their treasonous acts to get it and keep it on the market, same as you. So that is for the Dutch people. Zoete wraak, it's called.
Zoete wraak. I'll have to write that down and see if I can get it translated, because
Zoete, well, I can link you to, bring you into contact with each other, because I was thinking too that it would be interesting to have it translated in English.
Right. You know, there was one, we had Mission Possible Germany many years ago. I don't know what they did to this man, but I want to tell you, he really was a hero, because he not only wrote a book, and it's in German, I don't know what the name of it is, but he filed suit against the country of Germany for allowing it into his country.
Whoa, that's good. Yeah.
He said the next thing that happened is they came and took away his computer.
Oh, of course. Yeah, sure.
I said, I'm surprised they didn't take you away with it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've never heard from him since, and I don't know what happened to him.
Do you know his name? Because then I can try and find the book.
Actually, I could find his name and I could email it to you.
Please do. Then I can check whether I can find the book. Yeah.
Because you see, not speaking any other language, I have no way of finding these
Well,
things.
my German is not very good, but I can understand what is there. Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I went so far as I wrote an article about it, and that the FDA approved poison, what this man did, that was Mission Possible Germany. And I want you to know the FDA, it was some organization, government here, closed down the newspaper.
Oh, yeah. You can always do that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they've got away. In other words, that was, I guess, their revenge, because they published it and it was a front page story. I said, well, the good thing about it is you can't take the story back and we still give it out.
Exactly. Yeah.
You do what you have to do.
As I said in the beginning, we have this institute, this food institute in Holland. It's called the Voedingscentrum, the food center. And I call it the undernourishing center because they have this little booklet and they talk about the food additives. And in Holland, these food additives have numbers with an E in front.
Yeah, E951 is aspartame.
Exactly, yeah. And they say about these E numbers that they are all different, but in one aspect, they are all the same. They are safe. And of course, they lie.
Well, let me tell you what, I think there is another book in Holland. Let me tell you about this. we had a Mission Possible France, and Corinne Goulet,
Corinne Goulet. Yeah. I know.
marvelous, and she wrote a little book and had it translated into different with the E numbers in it.
Yes.
You know the tragic thing that happened to her?
Yeah, she got suicided.
Well, or somebody threw her in front of a train, is what they. And
Yeah.
the thing of it is, she did such a marvelous job. She lectured to thousands of people, and she didn't live to find out a week later that Ajinomoto sold the France aspartame industry for €1, $1.12. I don't know if you knew that, but it was sold to the Netherlands. Did you know that?
Oh, why am I not surprised? No, I didn't know. I'll look into that.
And somebody has taken her place now as far as Mission Possible France. But that woman was marvelous. I know that
Yes.
Dr. Safredi, when he did a study on Splenda or sucralose to show that it was carcinogenic. And at the meeting, there was nobody there that spoke English, which is very odd, which was in France. And so she went there and she translated his material into English for him. I mean, she would do anything for anybody. And her story is really sad.
Yeah.
And woman.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the way they try to get rid of people like us. Saying the truth is a dangerous thing these days.
It is. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
But since I already lost a son to the chemotherapy, the worst has happened in my life already. I don't give a damn what happens to me.
Well, I have to tell you something that's comical, I guess. I went up to see Jerome Bressler. And Jerome had told me, he says, excuse me. He says, it started here. Excuse me. He said, it should end here. And they should have, the Chicago Tribune should do a story on the real truth about aspartame.
Yeah.
He says, I'll never be satisfied until they do it. And I said, well, Jerome, all you've got to do is give an interview. And he said, oh, I can't do that. They would, come after me. And he told me about the time a TV station put an apple pie on his front porch and said, we just want to talk to you. Well, anyway, I called the Chicago Tribune, and this lady, Monica Ng, said she'd go see him. So, and my husband was there with us, and he said, well, don't go empty-handed. I said, I never would. And so Monica says, you just go first. So I came, I stopped, and I got some candy and a rose, and I came in there, and I went in there first, and I said, hi, Jerome, sweets for the sweets. And I said, I want you to meet a friend of mine. And her name is Monica Ng, and she is from the Chicago Tribune. The Chicago Tribune has said, we will do that if you can get Jerome Bressler to talk. And somebody called Lane Shore and said, you don't even know Jerome Bressler. And he said, I certainly do. But nobody knew about this except for this one reporter or this meeting. So anyway, turned out Monica was so charming and so beautiful that she just sat there and started talking to him. And all of a sudden, he opened up and talked. She had a little jigger tape recorder and talked for 2 solid hours. Whoa. And finally, he says, but you can't use this. He says, they'll come after me. And she said, Jerome, if you're well known all over the world like you are, he says, they won't come after you. He said, if they were going to come after anybody, they'd come after Betty. He said that. So there is no reason for you not to speak. That's the safest thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Is to give us the information. And he went on to tell how the studies were so bad that Dr. Adrian Gross would go over to the company, GD Searle, and that they would lock the door and not let the FDA in, because that was back when the FDA was honest. And he said Dr. Gross would scream and say, I'm going to get a court order if you don't open the door, because the studies were so bad. But actually, aspartame is a literal chemical deadly poison, and the only thing it does is kill or cause disability and disease. So the interesting thing as to how that ended is that the Chicago Tribune would never publish the story. They just lied about it. They thought that Jerome Bressler would never speak, and when he did, they didn't publish.
No, because there is always an editor-in-chief who says, we're not going to publish this. That's my experience with the vaccine interviews that I have done with large newspapers in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's just what
the journalist is enthusiastic. He said to me, "Oh, Desiree, if only 10% of what you're saying is true, there should be a hearing in government." And I said, "Well, it's not going to happen, darling."
Let me just tell you what happened down there in Augusta is that a fellow by the name of Alex, he walked in and with a friend, and they didn't have protective clothing on, and the friend dropped dead, and it destroyed Alex's lungs. And the way that I heard about this was interesting, is that I was lecturing, and a man stood up who obviously was an attorney, and he says, "Now, the story I'm going to tell you, you will never be able to find out." He says, because it's been sealed, and the case has been sealed, and that, but I want you to know that what Betty is telling you is the truth, and you need to listen. And so, ironically, this is just unbelievable. 2 weeks later, I'm talking to somebody in Tennessee, and he's telling me about this fellow Alex that walked into the Augusta plant and that his friend dropped dead, and that they followed him, and he went to a journalist at CNN, and they took it down as a tape recorder. And the next thing that happened is that both journalists were fired, and the tape was destroyed, and found out that what had happened was that they said that if he didn't settle, that all his friends would be fired. Well, that would have been the best thing, because who knows if they're even alive today if they worked around aspartame.
Yeah.
And when I finally got him and found him, he told me, the thing's been sealed. He says, but I prayed I'd find the real formula, because it's got to be a lot worse than people think. And he said, this box appeared on my front porch. And I said, that's interesting, Alex. I'd like to have the box. And so he said, well, he says the case has been sealed and I can't give it out. And you would have to go to my attorney. And I said, who is your attorney? He said, Billy Moore. And he says, do you know him? I said, he's my husband's best friend. So we went out and spoke to Billy Moore. He says, you'll never get away with it. You'll never do it. Anyway, it turned out that Alex disappeared. And one day I went to find him, found out he didn't live far from me. And I said, Alex, I'm still after the box. And he said, well, I want you to know someone broke in the house. And he said, not anything was stolen except for that box with the records on aspartame.
Oh, gosh.
And I think the reason is I met a woman who was in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down.
Mm-hmm.
And doctors had been telling me that it was actually, a Nazi drug. And I said, well, I can't ever write about it because I cannot, unless I have facts, I will never write about anything.
Yeah, right.
And I said, how did you see it? He said the Stasi had it. I guess that's their police over there or something.
Yeah, that was in Eastern Germany. That was the police, state police. Yeah.
She said the Stasi had it, and they looked at it. She says, I looked at it, and it seemed so unreal that he said, that this couldn't possibly be true. And I said, well, what did it say? It said, well, it talked about infertility. I said, well, it causes infertility. And they said it was good for population control.
Yeah, right.
And so, but I was never able to get any material about it. She said, today, she says, I've gone through all your records and I've seen all the things that were in those reports, and I'm sorry I didn't buy it. But without it, there's nothing that we can do about it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that it was actually, it wasn't G.D. Searle anyway who made it. It was a company that they bought.
Yeah.
And they must have gotten it through, what was the name of that, when they sent the scientist over here?
Oh, Project Paperclip.
Clip.
Project Paperclip. Yeah.
And somehow that they got it and decided to make a drug. I do know the fact that the case they cite is literal, because I met the man who was in there at the time. He says he didn't get some on his finger and lick it. He said what he was doing, he was smoking a cigarette, and he wasn't supposed to be using it in the lab. He wasn't supposed to be smoking in the lab, and he got some on his cigarette. And she said, I was there. And I said, how come you're willing to tell me? He says, because they didn't give me my pension. And he said, I went to work with G.D. Searle when they bought this company, and I have all the records to it, you know, but it doesn't do anybody any good, because there's no way to, you know, too many years have gone by to prove many of the things. The only thing we can prove is that it is a literal chemical poison. And today, almost 100% of all scientific peer-reviewed studies show that aspartame does horrible, horrible things. The only studies that exist, they show safety, are either been controlled by industry, paid for by industry, you know, some flack. And that's the only way that actually it was Dr. Walton that did the research for 60 Minutes, and he showed that 92% of all scientific studies showed the problems. He says, but if you eliminate 6 because the FDA got involved, you know, after the good FDA people left, and there was one pro-aspartame summary. He said, but if you eliminate those, 100% of all independent studies show the problems. There's no way to hide it. Everything's a matter of public record.
Yeah. Well, Betty, we have been 2 hours with this aspartame story. Oh,
yes, it went by very fast.
Thank you so much for all the information that you gave. And I really hope that people at this side of the ocean, but anywhere in the world, because anybody can see the archives of consciousconsumernetwork.tv and see this interview. It's life-saving.
On our list too. We have an aspartame information list, and they can get on it. And
yes, yeah. I will, with the YouTube video, I will put up the information about the things that you said and the sites the websites that you mentioned.
Okay, wonderful.
I will put them there. So then, well, I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the information that you gave, and I really hope that it has helped to awaken people to the fact that they are being poisoned by diet drinks and diet this, that, and the other, because aspartame is very, very dangerous.
And poisonous. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, and it's like hands across the world. We can keep it going and keep saving lives.
You too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And listeners and technician Biggie, thank you so much for your support. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times, who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.